All right, here we go. We are getting started on one of the most important topics that we feel is important to talk about, especially in today's dynamics of real estate and the elders getting older and our parents getting older and people that we work with starting to go through this transition of life. So today we have Melissa here. Myself is I'm Dennis O'Brien. I work in the Indianapolis and the surrounding areas. Melissa, where are you from?
I'm in California, Santa
Okay,
Barbara to be exact.
Santa Barbara. So do you work all the surrounding areas as well?
Oh yes, yes. I actually
Perfect.
have a quite a big network here in California, and I actually refer out a lot of business throughout the state. So it's
Perfect.
very rewarding.
Perfect. And the topic we are discussing today is
Trusts. We are talking
trust.
about the importance of trusts and estate planning for seniors. And then we're going to segue into my portion, which is going to be a little bit more focused on the trustees, what their responsibilities are, and how a trust can actually um, help not just you, but your entire family to really build, protect, and transfer generational wealth.
Awesome. Disclaimer, we are not real estate attorneys or estate attorneys. So this content that we're presenting today is merely just for informational purposes only. With that being said, Melissa and I have a vast amount of vendors and trusted partners that we can align you with
Mhm.
to go through this process and this transition. So, well, let's dive in. The first slide here is what is a trust, right? We hear it talked about. They didn't really go into this in college and schools and stuff like that. So, what is a trust? Can you talk to me a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, so a trust is going to be, well, it's basically a fiduciary relationship in which one party, the grantor, gives the second party, a trustee, the right to hold and direct property and assets for the benefit of third party beneficiaries. And another way to look at it is a trust is an instruction manual to determine how a person's money and estates should be managed and distributed both while the person is alive or after death.
Love it. Yeah, and some of the key components there, as you see, are trustees, beneficiary, and the grantor. The person who creates the trust,
Mm-hmm.
also known as the trustor. So, should everybody have a trust?
Yeah, 100%.
Yep.
It,
So,
it's a and you'll go into the pitfalls, but absolutely everybody needs to have a trust, and it
especially if
needs
you have a
to.
spouse, children, relatives, close
and
friends that are important with you,
and
you
the other
know,
thing too with that is that if you don't have a trust that's growing with you in every stage of your life, you are doing yourself a disservice.
can you dive into that a little bit more? What's the disservice mean for families and
Right. So, and I will talk a little bit more about that on my end, but suffice to say that if you have a trust and let's say you get married and more life events take place, whether somebody gets remarried or the kids get older, you want to have a trust in place that addresses those life changes so that in the event that life continues to change, you don't lose some of your money, essentially.
love it? So let's dive into some of the most common types of trust, the
Okay.
revocable trust and the irrevocable trust. One is more common, one's less common. So revocable trust is typically announced or said as a living trust, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And could be so that could be altered at any time or canceled by the grantor. It provides flexibility and control. Um, it allows you to manage the assets anytime you want during the lifetime, as long as you're still competent,
hmm
you're able to manage that.
hmm
So the so would you say 80-90% of trust are revocable?
I don't know about that, but what I would say is that, you definitely want to have people, um, consult as a family in terms of making sure that the revocable trust stays a revocable trust for as long as it needs to, because there may come a time when that trust needs to become an irrevocable trust because certain family members are no longer deemed competent and or able to make decisions for themselves. And you don't want them to make a decision that, you know, if they were of sound mind, that they would have regretted that. So that is an issue that the family needs to address collectively.
Yep. And obviously, with the revocable trust, you can terminate it. You can
Mm-hmm.
change all the assets inside of it. You can
Mm-hmm.
buy and sell the assets. You can change the beneficiaries inside of that.
Mm-hmm.
On the other flip side of that, the irrevocable trust, it's pretty much like set in stone. There's no flexibility or less flexibility on those
Mm-hmm.
because the grantor has lost full control over the assets.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So typically you're gonna find your attorney leaning towards the revocable trust if you're active, you're alive, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and moving things, you're still buying assets, you're transferring assets, you're going to be more towards the revocable trust.
Mm-hmm.
So avoiding probate. So it seems like probate is a bad word. Um,
Well, yeah.
you know, it's one of those things you're like, when you hear somebody says, well, it's in probate. To me, I'm in real estate and I've been in real estate for 18 years. When I
Mm-hmm.
hear probate, I feel like something's wrong. Do you
I
get that
feel
same
like,
feeling?
yeah, I feel like somebody's getting probed, and that's usually not a very welcome
That's
feeling
so
to
what
say.
so what is a probate? What is the probate process? What's that even look like?
I mean, the probate is essentially probate court, and um, you know, if somebody passes away, then and there are no written instructions from a trust, at minimum a will, then their entire estate is, along with many other things, subject to probate. And again, I'm not an estate planning attorney. I am not an attorney at all, but I definitely recommend consulting them on this. But I think they will agree with me in saying that if you don't have the proper documentation, um, your entire estate and more could end up in the government's hands. And that is what probate is. And I don't know about you, but I don't want the government making decisions on my behalf.
Right. So probate is the court supervised process. So
Of,
it's
yeah, legally distributing the deceased's estate assets
yep.
and other things.
And so if you don't have a bare minimum, a will and
Mm-hmm.
or a trust, then somebody's actually going to make the decision for you on your behalf according to those state laws. So the state
Exactly.
laws would regulate who gets what based on
Exactly.
your scenario. So
Exactly.
obviously not a very good way of ending that legacy.
I mean, I don't exactly get the warm fuzzies from that, do you?
No, not at all. No, and honestly, in some cases, maybe not in California, but here in Indiana, probate is
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily required. Simply if the assets are less than $50,000,
Oh, okay.
there's a way to avoid it.
Okay.
And yet that's not typical. Typically, your assets are going to be more than 50,000. One of the important topics that we're going to dive into is the privacy that you and your
Yeah.
family have by putting a trust in place. So
Uh-huh.
that's our next step is what's the privacy benefits of getting a trust.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, with it being in a trust, what does that do for the family and the beneficiaries?
Well, the other thing is that when you have something in probate court, I mean, the details of the probate of the estate itself, if you know where to look, it becomes public information. The entire information becomes public, which is it's a privacy violation, but it also opens the doors for identity theft and scams, which we see a lot of right now.
Yeah, and I can tell you just from being in real estate, I have
Mm-hmm.
resources that can pull every single probate case there is in the state of Indiana at a click of a button.
Yeah.
Meaning that I have access to whose properties they are, the assets,
Hmm.
what is all in, encompassing on those. So wills versus trust, wills become more public record during probate. That's when it flips over to the public side of things. The trusts remain
Uh-huh.
private, keeping your affairs confidential and within the family. So nobody's going
Yep.
to look at, Dennis O'Brien's assets, unless I have it in my personal name and it goes into a will, and then it's going to be all public. For instance, I'm 43. If I have a trust,
Hmm.
as I age and get into my 60s, 70s, and 80s, hopefully
Hmm.
my assets are going to continue to grow.
Hmm.
So it's important to me not only to protect my privacy, but my legacy privacy, right? So I want to make sure
Yeah.
my kids and their matters matter to me. I want to make
Yeah.
sure that those are cleaned up and put away. So control over assets distributions. Again, this is a key element to having a trust in place. You have full
Hmm.
control to disperse your assets, buy assets, control your assets. Um, so typically, if you created the trust, you're also the trustee. So you're the grantor,
Hmm.
you're the person that's managing these assets.
Hmm.
Unlike a will, trust assets do not go through the probate like we just talked about. So
Hmm.
again, having full control all the way to the time of either death or just mentally not able to move forward. This is full control. This is the reasoning for
Hmm.
having the trust in place. Again, more so of the same peace of mind, assuring that your wishes will be followed.
Uh-huh.
Having a trust will reduce stress, knowing your assets are protected. Again, when you speak with your attorney, and I know Melissa's gone through this with clients as well,
Yeah.
there's a clear task list. There's a clear process of going through this.
Hmm.
And it's good for not only you, but it's good for your loved ones, your beneficiaries to go through that as well. So they have clear instructions. They understand the whole process. Um, and it eliminates fights. It eliminates a lot of disruption when the party passes. There's so
Hmm.
much into that goes into that. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And we'll go into a little bit more of that legacy planning and family feud prevention in my portion of the seminar.
So some of the key steps are right here. Create a trust, consult with an experienced attorney, define the terms and conditions of the trust. So it's very important and crucial for your family, whether it's your spouse or kids or parents, sit down with them and kind of go over some terms and conditions of what you want to see happen. Select a reliable trustee, find a trust with your assets. Question,
Hmm.
and this might be something that you'll hit on. So if it is, then tell me.
Hmm.
Does your trustee have to be a family member?
No, and I actually talk a lot about that. And a lot of people are under the assumption and or misconception that, somebody that they trust within the family needs to be the one that manages their affairs. And I, for so many reasons and more, firmly believe that that should not be the case. And a lot of people think that it's very just easy to just write up something with the right person and have it on file. And for so many reasons and more, that is not the way it needs to go. You need to have a trustee who is extremely responsible, can handle a lot of documentation, can manage a lot of moving parts, and can look out for the good of the trust and the beneficiaries within. But you also want somebody who can be very neutral and can facilitate difficult conversations in a neutral yet forward moving manner.
It's important to hire or align with not only great attorneys and vendors to help you through this process, but it's also
Mm-hmm.
important to have realtors like us
Yeah.
to navigate through the assets, making sure that all your real estate assets are in the trust. provide with the actual amount that the assets are worth, and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. So guidance of the property management, and so forth. So case study. This is a clear example of the ways that this is helping out with seniors. So senior
Uh-huh.
couple sets up a revocable trust, avoids probate, saving time and money. Here in the state of Indiana, trust to set up initially are ranging between $2,000 to $4,000. I don't know what
Ooh.
they are in California.
Uh, I mean, it's kind of the same actually,
Okay. And
just not too
it's going to
far off
vary
depending.
based on assets. So
Yeah.
if the more
Yeah.
assets you have, the more books, obviously the charges go up. And yet typically it's between 2 to 4,000. Now, if you're just doing a
Yeah.
will, which you know, some may just choose just to do a will, that's roughly $500 to $1,000 in the state of Indiana.
Okay.
So just kind of give you kind of both spectrums there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the assets are distributed to grandchildren for education purposes. This is this case study. The outcome was a peace of mind for the couple. Beneficiaries benefits
Mm-hmm.
from the well-managed assets. I can tell you, and I'm sure Melissa can as well. Um, I've been in scenarios where, mom passed away, and children just get in fights about the different assets. They want to have control. Um,
Really? That happens?
yeah, and to me, and it pulls on my heartstrings, right? Because to take the time away from grieving your loss,
Mm-hmm.
greed sets in. Um, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, for a lot of different people, this is a tough, tough time in life.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a plan in place, it's it goes down a hill very, very fast. And unfortunately, family feuds, family fights, it breaks. I've seen people get divorced over a
Yep.
loss
Yeah.
and so forth. So it's so crucial, so critical to get a plan in place, not just for you, but for your
Mm-hmm.
loved ones.
Well, and the other thing too, what it really boils down to, it's more than the money and physically speaking, and I'll talk about this in my portion as well, that
Hmm.
you cannot divide um you cannot divide real estate. And that's what it really boils down to is there's real estate within an estate. And that cannot, I mean, you literally cannot cut a house in half and divide it and say, go do what you want. And that's where the beauty of having a real estate plan is in place is really preventative of the outcomes that you just described. All right. So this is my part about, you have a trustee. My portion is called I'm the trustee. Now what? And this is just my general information, which we'll get to at the very end. And again, a disclaimer, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a CPA, and I'm not a financial planner. And we advise all of our clients to consult with those professionals and bring them into the conversation as we move forward in our journey together. So today is really for when I do this live, this for people to ask questions and get resources. Like you said, I have a lot of people that I know, love, and trust, pun intended. And the idea is to find available solutions. So as long as you don't mind my really interesting sense of humor, we can just continue. But the purpose of this is not just to find resources, but really to enlighten people and empower people through this education that there's more to this than just the generic get a will, get a trust. I mean, you really have to put a plan together that not just aligns short-term and long-term goals, but the the outcome that I hope, I intend for everybody here is that they feel empowered to really take a stand with how they build, protect, and transfer their generational wealth, particularly with their real estate. So we're going to cover, when we already covered what is a trust, we're also going to look into what the role, duties, and responsibilities of a trustee is. We're going to look at 21 responsibilities that the trustee needs to know. We're going to talk about what a real estate planner is and how people can actually prevent family disputes through this process. So we already talked about what a trust is, and each trust tends to fall into 6 different categories. And we talked about a living trust or a testamentary trust. Wait, no, we talked about revocable and irrevocable.
Yep.
But the estate planning attorney will go into which of these are going to be, especially if it's living or testamentary, revocable, irrevocable. They're going to go into details as far as which is the most appropriate for you and your family and your situation. But the main thing to know is that whether your trust is funded or unfunded, you can have a trust, but if it is unfunded, there is a chance that it can still end up in probate court, which is why you need to go over this process with your favorite real estate plan or estate planning attorney. So the benefits of the trust we kind of already talked about. The other thing that we didn't mention is that it can protect your assets from creditors. There are a lot of identity theft and scams out there, and that is one of the things that if your estate ends up in probate court, like we talked about, it is, if you know where to look, public information, and people can target you and steal your identity and basically go on that one-way trip to Jamaica without you. So I
Yes, they
would
can.
definitely
Look that up just to see, and it shows that we do not levy any estate taxes. So that must have
oh,
just changed. So Indiana does not levy any estate tax
okay.
from people. So that's good.
Okay.
We like that.
All right. Well, I'm not gonna go too much into detail with this just because this requires a conversation with a CPA and an
Mm-hmm.
attorney. But basically, and this is why we say it's important to really have a trustee that can act as a fiduciary, which means they will act with loyalty, prudence, and care, and in the best interest of the beneficiaries of the trust, that they're able to manage the assets in the trust, including investing the assets in a manner that is consistent with the trust's objectives and simultaneously with the beneficiaries' best interests. So, definitely not taking the assets, cashing them out, and then investing them in your best friend's new startup. I mean, that would not be consistent with that
No.
or in the best interests of the trust. So definitely, they also need to be keeping accurate and complete records of all the transactions going in and out of the state and providing that regular accounting work to the beneficiaries. So people need to be kept apprised on that. And that's why it's so important to have such good communication, because it is a trustee's legal obligation to regularly communicate and keep the beneficiaries informed about the trust's activities and any changes to the trust's terms or the administration. So, and this is where we're going to keep going into the duties as a trustee. They need to be loyal to the trustee itself, needs to be loyal to the trust and has to act in the best interest of the beneficiaries. So let's say you have a family member that's your trustee and executing your estate, but if a decision has been made that will affect the beneficiaries, this is where a lot of conflicts can start, is having family members acting in as the trustee role, and they're saying, well, guess what, mom and or dad actually didn't leave you the property, they actually left it
Mm-hmm.
too, and this is kind of that tip of the iceberg. And that's why it's so important to have somebody who can be loyal to the trust without their potentially being any
Yeah,
types of conflicts
their
of
best
interest.
interests. Yeah. I've
Right.
I've had it where son or daughter takes over as a trustee,
Yeah.
and their own intentions get in the
Yeah.
way of the best interest
Yes.
of the actual
Of the
trust.
trust. Yep.
Hmm.
Yep. And I see that too when I get people calling me with regards to selling their deceased parents' home. They want an outcome and
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else is not willing to sell because of their agenda, and there's just this constant battle. And so um
So
that's
one
one.
way to solve this is actually having a plan while you're living
Yes.
and go over it with your individuals that are going to be benefiting from your legacy.
Right.
Go over it with them, right?
Right.
Share this goal in mind of what you want.
Well, and that way it makes it easier for people to act with prudence, diligence, care, and impartiality, because if the communication is there, then those duties should be a non-issue. But I definitely saw a scenario where a senior loved one, dementia is one of those things that sneaks up on you and you don't realize it's a problem until it's too late. But unfortunately, the dementia kicked in, and when this loved one was no longer of sound mind, but people were not convinced because there was no diagnosis. The loved one made changes to the living trust that affected the entire family, and it wasn't until it was too late that people realized that they were kicked out of the will, and all these other just terrible things that they
Mm-hmm.
knew following the diagnosis and following the passing, that when that person was of sound mind, they would not have done that. So that's why it's important to have somebody who's so impartial, because it tends to mitigate at least a little bit of something like that happening. So this is where we get into the weeds on the 21 bona fide responsibilities that trustees need to know. And this is just a list. There's 21, but what you see on the screen is obtaining between 10 to 20 death certificates. And that's that I definitely recommend that, because you're going to find that going through the records of accounts and records of debts and all of those things to close out the person's estate, they are going to require bona fide death certificates that are not copies. They need to be original. They need to be signed, and copies of death certificates do not suffice. They need an original. So that's
Mm-hmm.
why I suggest between 10 and 20, because that list is going to add up. I definitely recommend contacting the attorney and having a session with them to understand the trust and the instructions therein, because you're also going to have to go into their financial information, and you're going to have to really take charge of closing out all of those accounts. And keeping records of any type of debt and managing those statements as well is going to be a big one. You're going to want copies of insurance policies, any type of life, health, disability, long-term care, Medicare, homeowners, autos. Definitely contact the Social Security office and inquire if there is a death benefit. And you are also going to want, this is something that many people don't know about, when you are talking to the Social Security office, you want to have the recently deceased's name added to the master death list in order to prevent fraud.
Is it critical for the soon-to-be trustee to sit down with the attorney, get all the information lined up in terms of logins, passwords, all the
Mm-hmm.
financial information? That's critical, right? To
Yeah.
go ahead, if you're going to accept this role as a trustee,
Mm-hmm.
let's go ahead and prepare so that way when the time comes, which it will
Mm-hmm.
come, you're ready. Like there's going to be a task list of things and responsibilities that you're going to take on, and
Mm-hmm.
yet you're not searching through the weeds trying to find out where the passwords are, or who's doing what, or what financial institutes you're with. Like everything is lined out.
Mm-hmm.
So just for your sake and your past experiences, do you see a lot of clients doing that ahead of time?
Yes and no. Yeah, it's definitely a yes or no. It's a yes and no question. It's a no because for some people, a crisis happened and somebody was gone too soon.
Hmm.
And so when you're picking up the pieces and trying to piece together without the loved one there, that's a little bit difficult. But having all of that on file with your estate planning attorney would certainly make things much easier for the trustee to execute. So continuing down this list where we contact the utility companies, you're going to want to do all of that, obviously. You're going to want to contact the post office to reroute mail to the trustees, administrators, or executors estate, because you want to keep apprised on all of that communication. And the mailbox is actually one method of where scammers will drive by and look for houses that look like they've been neglected, and they will look and search through mailboxes and try to collect people's information that way. So I definitely recommend, as soon as humanly possible, to reroute mail. Absolutely. Even, if somebody's in a, like, say something happened and they're in rehab or they're temporarily living somewhere else, I would get ahead of that and have mail rerouted so that people don't expose themselves to scammers.
Yep.
I would also contact government agencies like the VA, especially if somebody served our country. They're definitely going to want to talk to the government agencies like Homeland Security and the VA to see if there are any additional death benefits available. Obviously, to talk to the DMV and get the driver's license canceled, any IDs canceled, remove the disabled placards, get the vehicle registrations and all of that, under control and marked as no longer applicable. You'll want to talk to especially if somebody retired from a big company, like let's say Pepsi. I would talk to the former companies that they worked for and see if there are any family death benefits that they're eligible for. I would also do, and this is kind of critical, do an inventory list of their assets. You're going to want to notate tangible personal properties and anything else of value in the home, because that's going to be very important for this next portion. In addition to closing all the email and the club and organization memberships, if you have that gym membership, they do everything on auto pay. So, you got to make sure that the local gym's not debiting your account, or any other memberships and subscriptions continue to debit the account.
They do that with people that are alive too, so they don't.
Well, shoot.
Dang
Okay.
it.
I know.
That gym membership that I've had for the last 5 years? Oh, man. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you definitely want a time of death appraisal on the home. I would recommend any homes or any properties that are within the trust to get a time of death appraisal. And you want to do that actually within, a few months of the person passing away. I would definitely contact their CPA or accountant, and I would gather your deceased loved one's tax returns from the last 2 years. You're going to be responsible, and I say you, I mean the trustee. The trustee is going to be responsible for filing the estate's tax returns. So you're going to want to obtain an EIN number and get a hold of filing the estate's tax returns, because there will be a tax return for the estate. And on that note, I definitely recommend talking to a financial planner, because there may be some properties, stocks, bonds, and other things that are in this estate that you'll want to get some advice on how to disseminate that.
Mm-hmm.
So, definitely recommend that. And then number 19 is very important, because, and we'll talk about that in the coming of slides, but definitely contact a real estate planner like you or me, because we are trained in more areas than transacting of homes. We look at real estate holistically, and this is just part of that involves bringing in the correct fiduciaries and professionals to really build, protect, and transfer generational wealth, but to also facilitate the entire journey of the family and beyond. And that includes providing resources as necessary, but also coming up with a plan with additional properties that avoids taxes and could even build your family's legacy. More on that to come, but it is also the trustee's responsibility to communicate, educate, and resolve disputes with the beneficiaries of the trust. And that's where things get sticky, especially when you go to number 21, distribute the assets.
Very, very sticky.
Very sticky. So here's the actual list. You can certainly take a screenshot of that. If the print is too small, then
Yeah, we'll have a
email
download for
it.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say
Yep.
if the print, just email us and we'll send you a copy. So what is a real estate planner? And I think of a real estate planner as more than a realtor that transacts homes. A real estate planner is somebody who has undergone a series of certifications within the real estate planning program. Think of us as, you know, we have additional hats that we wear. One of those is being a trust sales specialist but we really, our goal is to help families to build, protect, and transfer their generational wealth in the real estate that they own. A real estate planner is somebody who really understands clients' financial goals and needs and makes recommendations that really align with those goals. We often are collaborating with more than just the family. We bring in the appropriate fiduciaries, planners, etc., to fulfill the instructions of not just the trusts and supporting the needs of the beneficiaries, but really keeping everything together. So as a real estate planner, I have a lot of resources that are not just fiduciaries or financial or attorney related. We have relationships with people like senior move managers who will come in and declutter the house for you. And obviously it's a service. It's not something that we just provide for free because it requires manual labor, but we will come in and we will coordinate the sorting, the selling, and the donating of personal items. And we will also sit down with people to really analyze, does it make sense to rent this property out? Maybe there are no instructions in the trust of what to do with the home. So we sit down with the family and we say, well, does it make sense to rent it? And we have a little spreadsheet where we do an asset performance test to see if it would perform well as a rental. Maybe it won't, or maybe the goals of the family are such that it makes more sense to sell the property.
But Melissa, that sounds like more work for the trustee if we just keep all these assets in there.
I mean, there's that, but that's why you want a plan in place so that the trustee has less work to do.
There you go.
So that's what we do as planners. And in helping people to make these decisions, we will also help them understand that if they were to sell, when they were to sell, this is what here's a rough estimate of what they can expect with capital gains taxes. Potential depreciation, that's where the CPA comes in to do depreciation, but also coming up with some investment strategies that could even avoid or defer capital gains taxes, which the outcome of that would be to help create generational wealth for the beneficiaries. And that's where legacy planning comes into place. So when somebody comes to us and you tell me what you see in this space. But what qualifies as somebody's personal residence if they've owned the home, lived in the home for any two of the last 5 years. And when you sell a personal residence, you are subject to capital gains taxes, but when it comes to personal residences, if you've lived in the home or you and one other owner have collectively lived in the home, you could qualify for anywhere up to $250,000 or $500,000 tax exemption upon selling the home. However, that doesn't mean that you still won't have to pay capital gains taxes. I mean, here in California and specifically where we live, homes are up to $2 million. So if you have somebody who purchased a home for $100,000, lived in it up until the day they passed, and then now the home is owned by a trust and the beneficiaries have made the decision to sell it, that's a lot of gain that they're going to be taxed on. So if you have somebody who, and this is very important as well, because somebody buys a home, a parent buys a home at $500,000, and the home is owned by a trust. The home is then transferred upon death to the beneficiaries. The beneficiaries absorb this cost basis, but at the same time, they don't absorb it. They get what's called a step up in cost basis, and this gets absorbed so that if they were to sell it, they would not pay any gains on it because they would get the market value at the time mom passed away.
And when mom passes away, you do a at death appraisal, correct?
Exactly. That will determine what the fair market value is. And then if somebody were to sell it, then the whole purpose, they would avoid capital gains taxes on that. However, some people think that it's okay to pass on their home to their descendants and or somebody else while they're alive. They think they're doing their family a service by transferring it to them while they're alive. But unfortunately, when somebody receives a home, is added to title on a home, they get the home at the original value that the loved one purchased it for. And so whatever that value is at the date of the death, they will get taxed upon that gain if they choose to sell it. And that's where you and I come in with, here, let's look at who owns what. Let's look at why it would make sense to hold it, to rent it, or to sell it, because there's a lot at stake here, as you can see. The big question now is, how can you prevent family disputes with investment properties, and what are my options in terms of dividing real estate? Because we can just go in and chainsaw a house and say, here you go, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Nope.
What do you mean, no?
Unfortunately, it's not livable at that point. I've seen some chainsawed houses, not livable.
I think we've all seen some chainsawed houses on HGTV. But
Yes.
this is a case. I'm going to answer those questions with case studies on, and this is a pretty prevalent one that we talk about in our real estate planner community. There was a family that had the primary residence, and the father, who happened to pass away, also owned an apartment complex. Now, this set of parents have 4 kids. Each of the 4 kids, well, 3 out of the 4 kids, they have their own families. And as from what I remember, 2 of them lived in different states. But the story of how this family transferred their wealth with their real estate to really build a family legacy, it is absolutely incredible. And I hope that everybody watching this can at least be empowered by this family. So when this family came to us, the real estate planners, it was just the mom. She had her residence that she needed to downsize from, and there was also this apartment complex that nobody wanted. I mean, they have their own families, and 2 of the kids are out of state. How are they going to manage an apartment complex? So we brought in, and by the way, the home that she lived in and the apartment complex were owned by either the same trust or 2 different trusts. However, it was set up by the same trust attorney. So we brought in that trust attorney to have a conversation with. We also brought in a CPA who knows how to use real estate to defer taxes. That is important. Side note, there are CPAs out there who will file your taxes for you, but there are also CPAs who will literally strategize with you and say things, for example, like, you know, if you hold on to this for X amount of years, um, then I recommend selling, and then you would want to buy something this amount to avoid paying this type of taxes. Those are what we refer to as a tax strategist.
Yep.
And it's very important to note that there's a difference between those two.
Huge difference.
Huge difference. So,
There's about 50 books based on that, by the way.
oh yeah,
Tax-free wealth is one of them. So
Bigger Pockets has some good resources as well. And I actually just read a couple of books. There's 3 books on how to avoid paying, well, I shouldn't say that because it's not legal, but how to defer capital gains taxes using real estate, and really talking in layman's terms about the real estate, about the tax code and how it's very advantageous to real estate owners. I digress. So we have this family with, and we brought those professionals together. And we also, after we brought the professionals together, we had conversations with each of the kids, and we said, okay, we just met with your mom to help her create a real estate plan. Here's what the attorney and the financial planner and the fiduciary all had to say. And these are the wishes that these are the wishes of your mom and the trust, and therefore the estate, as it applies to you, the beneficiaries. So we all had this conversation. And we also said, you know what, Mom, what if you can bless your kids while you're still alive? Would you? And she said, absolutely. So what we did is, with the correct professionals in place, we came up with a solution that the trust was to sell the apartment complex, and in downsizing her primary, the trust was set up such that the trust purchased, or at least put down, a down payment on each of these kids, a single family home for each of these kids. How is that beneficial? Well, they got to predetermine their inheritance, which is pretty freaking cool.
Yes, that would be awesome.
Sign me up for that. And then there's also the, planning in advance, which avoids disputes later on. This is a huge component right here of legacy planning that avoids the disputes after the fact. So they not only got to predetermine their inheritance, but they got the single family home that they're raising their families in, which they co-own with mom. And again, CPA and attorney organized the scenario. And in return, everybody got a win. And so upon mom passing away, her portion of their own home, they received as a step up in cost basis. And the result of this was effectively building, protecting, and transferring the generational wealth. Mom got to avoid paying capital gains taxes, and upon her death, the capital gains taxes do not get passed down. So there were no capital gains taxes because they had both passed. So having a trust in place is not so much, not just keeping your estate out of probate, but if you have a trust in place, this family literally bought their own home and homes for their kids. There are a lot of possibilities there. And this is why it's so important to not just having a real estate plan in the event of somebody passing. I mean, creating a real estate plan can, even bless your entire family. And what better way to accomplish that than by setting it up in advance?
Yeah, and I'll just say this is Melissa and I have been blessed to be involved with a community across the nation that has professionals like us that are certified. We have these conversations all the time.
Yep.
This is what we do. And so, for instance, Melissa's in California. I'm in Indiana. There's definitely different price points. There's different advantages, disadvantages. So having a network like we do allows you and your trust and your family to be diverse and
Mhm.
protected and keep the number one goal at bay, which is, just making sure that generational wealth is, achievable for you and your family.
And I'll even take that a step further to say there's over, as of now, I believe there's over 500 people in our community, the
Yep.
Keller Williams real estate planner community, over 500 of us across the United States. And we've all taken a series of courses and passed exams. For it's not something you just add to your profile. I mean, we've studied and we sit in on weekly meetings and trainings and more. But I had a conversation yesterday with somebody who has been retired for a while now, and she's in her 80s. And the question was, should she rent out her house until until she passes away or she's forced to move into a senior community? Or should she leave the house in the trust for her daughter to inherit? Or alternatively, should she sell it now? And, what would that mean for her financially? And so I took out my spreadsheets and I said, you know what? If you rent your house out for $11,000 per month, yes, you heard that correctly, you can expect to net, um, about $7,000, depending on various things, which would then give you a cap rate of, I don't remember what it was, but it was pretty low. What we suggested was potentially renting out the entire home for 2 years and then selling it and by doing a 1031 exchange into some investment property out of state. And we pulled up with some information from a partner of ours in Memphis. And we ran some numbers and said, if you were to take this number right here and put it into over here with this guy in Memphis, Tennessee, you could expect to be netting $21,000 per month in cash flow. Now, we had a financial planner in the room who was also talking about various things as well, but
Hmm.
those are the kinds of conversations that we have. We're not out there just knocking on the door saying, can we sell your house for 2, 3, 4, $5 million and then call it a day? There's a whole approach and process that comes with it that involves not just building a legacy, but really becoming that multi-generational real estate planner for the family. And then just lastly on that note, I will say, every family has a family doctor, a family financial planner. They should have a family therapist, but who's managing the family real estate? And it should be somebody like you or me.
I agree. I agree. Well, I so appreciate your time, Melissa, and appreciate your guys' time being a part of this. Look for more details. I know Melissa's
Mm-hmm.
got some seminars on 1031
Mm-hmm.
exchanges. We have some coming up as well, along with Delaware statutory
Statutory
trust.
trust.
That's always a mouthful. But just making sure that you guys have a plan in place, right? So
Yeah.
we appreciate you guys being on, and we look forward to the next one.
Thank you so much.